of it means your body's affected, you know, and so I think it's just what's going on.
Yeah, well, exactly. And everyone's been kept out of the sunlight and all this kind of stuff as well. So, all right. Now you said you had something to talk about. Is that right?
Well, I thought when we discussed maybe we do something where we try to share sort of knowledge of something like the fairs or something like but not go into the buildings. I think like you know the construction or whatever else. We try to talk more about what we think these things were for.
Cool.
What's the purpose of this stuff? What's the reason that they would go to all this trouble? More in a sense of than trying to help us understand where we are now from it. That might be a good sharing our knowledge to bring something a little deeper.
Yeah, definitely. I think we're definitely at the point where, yeah, we need to start exploring answers. You know, we've sort of got all this information and all this sort of evidence, but yeah, we need to sort of start theorizing, I guess. So yeah, that sounds awesome. All right.
Yeah, and I have a question that I'll ask. It's a question that's been in my mind for some time, and I have a question. I wrote it down to see what you will want to answer.
Yep.
I'm curious. Do you want the question before we start like recording and everything and go on live, or do you want it like just fresh when it somewhere in the middle?
Give it to me live, I think. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll see what the universe pops out.
Yeah, I'm just curious to see what you, because I've been trying to work an answer myself, and I'm okay. I wonder what you think.
Yeah, awesome. Cool. All righty. Well, I'll just do an intro and we'll jump into it. All right, how you going, guys? Campbell here from Autodidactic. Hope you're having a fabulous day. Today we've got something special. We have Howdie Mickoski. Is that how I say it?
Yeah, close enough.
Pretty close. And Howdie's researcher. He's written a book on the world's fairs. So I'll leave the link below in that. Check that out. And a little birdie told me that you've got another book. Is that right? On the way, or another one out?
I've done 3 now in the last like 15 years. So one on ancient Egypt, one on like my spiritual death experience, then the world's fairs. So
okay, I think I saw that. Yeah, cool, awesome. So release some links below, and yeah, Howdie's also got a YouTube channel. So we thought today that we'd have a chat about the world's fairs, but rather than sort of talk about the structures themselves and where they are and what they were made of and how big they were, we thought we'd sort of go in and start throwing around some ideas about why and what was the purpose of them, and more to the point, what was the purpose of them being used the way that it looks like they were used. Because Howdie actually did a good interview with Crow 777 recently. You've done 2 now, haven't you?
Yeah, I did one with Jay Wiedner like you did. I saw the one you did with when you did the Star Forts, which was really interesting. And yeah, there's been a few of these, and I thought, of course, when you're doing an interview, you have to kind of go in many different areas and subjects. So, but to me now, after you get past the, that the buildings are impossible to construct in the time frame suggested and why, okay, the next point is, well, then what's really going on here? And then I thought, this would be a good thing for you and I to put our heads together with and see if we get something pops up that surprises us.
Definitely, because just recently, I think you've mentioned it, and John Levi's mentioned it. Actually, I think it was your interview, and yours. Oh, I can't even remember, saying that foods like puffed wheat and things were introduced at one of the world fairs. So it was almost like they were, introducing a new diet as well.
Yeah, almost every fair, like I think the Aunt Jemima pancakes that came in Chicago in '93. Yeah, the St. Louis World's Fair brought in puffed wheat and a few other things. So it's like it's so, for anyone who doesn't know what the fairs are about, maybe I'll give them a short. Probably if you're watching channels like us, but in case you don't, right? Supposedly building these massive 700-800 acre structures, which included segments. So one segment of the fair would have new technologies. So they would showcase whatever countries were bringing, whatever the newest technologies of the day was. Another area was showcasing artwork. Another area, yes, would then start showcasing what you might call society type things. So they might show foods and clothing, and then there'd be an area of historical stuff, and then there'd be an area of you might call them like what we would think of as rides today from Disneyland, but they were more like, they were often going back in the past. They were time travel historical rides, which are so strange. Then they had the human zoos, which are more like showing off primitive peoples as how they are so uncultured and savage compared to our world. And then of course you would have the restaurants and whatever. So this is what the fair encompassed, this massive amount of different areas. And the question is why? Why do you want all of that in one location?
Mm. And these fairs were pretty much all over the place, through Europe, America, Australia had them as well.
Right.
And one of the big questions about these fairs is every time you read about them, they say, you know, they were made for profit, basically to get people in there. And they say all these millions and millions of people came. But when you look at sort of the time frames and the populations and where they were and travel times,
Right.
that becomes a big question, you know, especially when you're talking about Australia, you know, because it's the same now. I think they say 1 million people or something. And everyone, that means we have to believe everyone sailed to Australia for what is it, 6 months to go to a fair and then sail home. So the question is that a false narrative, or are there a lot of people there, but they're coming from somewhere else? Because we have this narrative of the orphans and the orphan trains, because what you've just described as far as the different segments sounds very much like a school, doesn't it? Like an education system.
Yeah. And all of these fairs, they offered, you got a diploma when you left, which is so weird to see these World's Fair diploma. And there would always be like a Greek stylized image, Isis, in the diploma usually. But it's like, what are you getting a diploma for going to a World's Fair? So it leads into this idea of it's some form of indoctrination, some form of narrative construction for people. And so we're asking, well, yeah, like you say, well, what people? What are the people that are going to these fairs that are getting indoctrinated, and what are they being indoctrinated with?
Exactly. Because the first one, 1851, is that correct? I think
Yeah,
I heard something that there might have been some early ones, but the main.
Yeah, England and like France had some of the first, what you might call the large scale ones, and it was started by Napoleon. Napoleon is the one who started the first larger, what you almost might call world fairs. And that also made me wonder, it's like, okay, because they had these regional fairs, you know, all over the world, but why was it Napoleon who's the one who wanted to have something that was on a grand, massive scale? So all these things make your heads spin. But yeah, 1851 is the one that's supposedly the first original in London.
And these fairs, you know, as you said, these are, you know, hundreds of acres with very large buildings. So I guess, you know, the question is, you know, what are they? Where did they come from? Do you think they were built, or do you think that we're looking at, you know, dug out ancient cities that were repurposed, you know, basically found, you know, the most intact kind of cities, you know, they get all the tech from them, fit them out and yeah, reintroduce societies or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I know you did a talk with Martin like a few months ago where you were going through the Crystal Palaces, which is all the first fairs were in these Crystal Palaces, and you guys kind of suggested how they looked like a train station, or they looked like, I think like a docking or like airports for airships or something.
And most of them have train stations underneath them, those big glass houses, yeah.
Yeah, so it was almost like this, and these first ones were all in Crystal Palaces all over the world, and so it was like, is that just a coincidence that they all wanted to build them after the model, or did they decide we've got this building and we've got to explain what it's doing here, so we'll turn it into a fair? That's one for the first ones, right? For the first 20 years, and yeah, then you shift sort of around the time of some of the late ones in Paris and the one in Philadelphia, where they start now building these giant structures. And the problem is that you do get construction photos of smaller things, because when you figure 700 acres, that's a massive amount of stuff. So there is photos of them building actual, like, and you will see the claim is, the reason this went up so fast, right? The claim is it was built with this thing called staff, this combination of plaster and wood. And there are photos of plaster and wood buildings being built. So I don't doubt there was certainly some construction. You didn't have a 700-acre site there. But when you look at the larger buildings, the buildings that are huge and have these fantastic ornamentation, there's really no construction photos for any of those. All you will get is a finished building, some scaffolding on the outside, and nothing going on around it. So if I was going to have to make an estimate at this point, given what all the building contractors have talked to me of what a building site looks like, what you should see on a building site and why you don't see any of it here, is that probably you had, what, 10, 20 buildings maybe existing that they needed to refurbish and paint, and then they just built the rest of it around it to kind of hide what's new, what's old. That would be my guess.
Yeah. And then of course they knock them all over at the end.
Then
So it's also part of a plan to get rid of, you know, the past. You know, they sort of use it for this thing and give this story of, oh, it's just a temporary, you know, structure. Because the thing is, you know, in places like the Americas, you know, back in the 1800s, you know, pretty sparse population. So there could be large cities, you know, huge built out cities, and no one knows they're there. Someone discovers them, they clean them out, put out the story, oh, we're building this, and, you know, there you go. It's a World's Fair.
Yeah, like I'm sure, have you ever seen the 1587 Monty map?
Yeah, the big,
yeah,
planisphere.
because it's, you know what I mean, he's listing like cities. It's a pretty accurate map of the world for 1587, and he's got city markers all over the world. And when you'd see a city marker for Prague or Warsaw or whatever, it has the same symbol as all these places in the middle of the US continent. And it's like, and it has a name like Chicago for Chicago, or, you know, and so the question is, he wouldn't be labeling a native Indian village and labeling it the same as what he's showing Warsaw or Prague. He's got to be saying wherever there's markers on his map has to have been something worthy of being named a city.
Yeah.
So to me, that's one of the maps that kind of indicate we've got, the narrative is really wrong because the map indicates it's wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's becoming clear, you know, to anyone who's looked into it, that, you know, places like America and Australia as well were, you know, were built out. They have to have been, you know, the amount of construction they claim that they've done in, you know, these, you know, tiny periods. And this is their problem, is with Australia and America, that the timelines are, you know, condensed. You know, with Europe, they can kind of spread it out a lot more, and the story makes a bit more sense. But you get to, you know, especially Australia, you know, 1788 is the story, and then they say, oh, you know, by the 1820s, we've got buildings everywhere, you know, all these cathedrals built out, and it's just, so, I mean, we obviously talk about the mudflood a lot, because if we're talking about, you know, reintroducing populations, so what do we think happened there? Like cataclysm, and then where did these populations come from, do you think? Were these, because it doesn't seem like they were, you know, sort of people who escaped the cataclysm and were free thinking people, does it? It seems like they were at least happy to go along and just sort of eat up the information, you know, like they were childlike, you know, as far as,
yeah, that leads, I have a question for Campbell. This is a perfect time to ask it because it links to what he just asked. So I've been thinking about a very specific thing for a month now. So Campbell doesn't know my question, so it's a fresh question, and it'll lead into just what he just asked me. So the question is, how did the civilization, if there was a civilization that had these buildings, and if they got destroyed, it seems like there either had to be a giant source of energy that destroyed them, or some kind of warfare that destroyed it. You know, wasn't the resulting damage is so high for what we see. So that requires, if it's technology, it requires a particular use of technology. Okay, so the question becomes, if a group or some extraterrestrial force or whatever created this worldwide destruction, why have we not seen then that technology in use since this point? Why was it only at that point, and then it's like the technology was taken away? Or is that, would that be a wrong answer then? Or is that part of the story? Or was it something else that happened? Is that our answer to telling us it's something else? Something, yes, from the sun, something from the earth, something from, so that's my question.
Yeah. I mean, like you say, if it was, a man-made weapon that shot a big laser beam or laser beams or whatever to all the different places, whoever was controlling that technology should still be controlling it. They wouldn't have blown themselves up, would they? So,
Right.
and it should be advanced, way advanced from what it was.
Right.
So that doesn't it really fit what we see. What I've been looking into is the electric universe.
Right.
Have you heard of Thunderbolt's project?
Yeah. Yes.
And they talk about the stickman image, and this is something that is found in caves all around the world. And it's basically, if you haven't seen it, it's just like a stickman, but he's got a curve. His arms are curved up, legs are curved down, and there's two dots, two circles on each side.
Right.
And when they get a plasma in a plasma chamber, they actually produce that exact symbol.
Right.
And so the theory is that basically that appeared in the sky. And so the reason it's in caves is if you weren't in a cave, you probably got zapped. Okay,
Right.
so only the people in the caves were alive to sort of reproduce it. And so what it looks like is it was just a huge electrical buildup, and it's just discharged at some point. And we see this in the ground, the Liechtenstein patterns through deserts and things. It literally looks like exactly the same on the ground as it does with an electrical charge. So I tend to think that's what we're looking at. And I think it's got to do with ages, with time. And I think this is sort of why so much information is hidden from us, because the biggest thing that is hidden is really time and the way that we look at time. And they try and make us think it's linear and all this kind of stuff, and talk about astrology and the ages. It's not, it's all kook talk, right? That's all, sort of, that's for weird people. But I think that's what they're hiding, because we've just gone through a change of an age and look around. I mean, you reckon, that energies haven't changed. And so I think that they know that. I think that they know about these events, and I think these are the resets. And they just know the timeline, and that's why they're, who knows, at the moment they might be getting ready. We've got all these talks of dumbs and everything, underground tunnels everywhere. It's all coming out.
Right.
And I think that the opportunists just won. So maybe, last time this happened, they may have had prior knowledge. And so they hid away, left everyone else, to fend for themselves. Most of the population got wiped out. And then after the mess, they're still in control. And so, did they take babies or something, and hide them away and sort of raise them for a generation, and then sort of release them and sort of teach them of the new world, give them the new narrative, the new script. This is how it goes. This is how you're a nice, good worker, and you pay your taxes, and everything's good. So how do I go?
Yeah, I would be, I would be leaning to a lot of that actually now because it's really interesting that's kind of where I've kind of led myself to over the thinking of the last little while, and that's the sense of whoever took control of this reality, whoever sort of, whatever force or beings or whatever you want to call them, doesn't seem it took it by force. It more seems there was an advantage point that allowed them to jump in. And if they had the knowledge of what's going to come. Now, granted, if our human ancestors were so advanced to make these kind of buildings and to make these kind of cities and to use this kind of energy, in one sense, well, they should know about this too. Why weren't they prepared? So it's also this, so that's why it's so challenging to, unless somehow someone, the technology, the only answer I can get to that is that the people, the group that had the extra technology didn't use it on humans. They changed the timeline of the event.
Now that's another thing that's been discussed a lot is timelines. Michelle
Yeah.
Gibson
Yeah.
talked about that a bit.
Yeah, everyone expects the event to happen in 1800, but they crack it in 1700 before the humans are ready, kind of. Now that still fits everything we just said.
Yeah, well, and that's a big question: is how did the prior civilization fall because they look so advanced, and
Right.
so in control. I mean, again, it could be to do with ages, and if you look into sort of like the Golden Age, Silver Age, Bronze Age, Zep Tepi, the sort of Egyptian Golden Age. That could be part of it as far as positive and negative energies. And as it sort of goes down and we become less, spiritual, more physical, that allows people to come in, nefarious people to come in. I call them the whisperers, to come and sort of whisper in the ears of people and start, sort of spreading lies and rumors and that can, we know that brings down civilizations, and that's in our history. So that may be a part of it too. But I mean, the other question is, why are all the buildings so big? Is this even? I mean, I get the question: is this even our realm? Like, it's almost like these little people were brought into this big realm. This place with over, that giants used to live in. It's like, oh no, this is your place, and a lot of the buildings are gone now. But obviously the World Fair buildings. The old New York railway station, places like this. But you look at pictures from the 1920s and 30s and people look like midgets. It's ridiculous. All the cathedrals, the Vatican. Yeah. What's going on there?
Yeah, it's a really good subject, isn't it? You can just say, oh, well, they're building bigger to generate more energy. Well, okay, yeah, potentially true. But like you say, every part of the structures for that could be used are not what we would classify as modern human size. And that makes no sense. And what's so interesting to me in the historical narrative, for anyone who doesn't know, I actually got a degree in history, and why I didn't ask any of these things while I was going through university boggles my mind. But is that the story of how our ancestors are so much smaller than us, right? They always like to present that, in the 1500s, everybody's small, they're tiny. It's now we're so big, and we're, modern medicine and achievement and whatever, technology makes us so much bigger. And that always made no sense to me at all, actually. Like, no, if anything, their food and their water and their air, everything would be cleaner. They should be stronger, bigger than us, actually. So right away, there was something wrong with the narrative. And it's like, well, why do they want to push the narrative of we are the biggest, strongest there's ever been? It's got to be a lie.
Yeah. I mean, and they're probably everywhere, but definitely in Perth, we have these old, like the sort of settler villages and stuff you get around, colonial villages, and they build these houses, and all these houses you go in and the doorways are like 5.5 foot, just to give you that impression, that everyone's smaller. But you look back in time and a lot of, famous people at their heights are recorded and they're not little. And they also do it to age. They say, oh, everyone lived, they died when they were 30 years old.
Right.
But you look back to the Greeks and they're all living to their 80 and 90 and stuff. And it's like, hang on, you're just blatantly lying to me.
Have you ever had the chance, because I'm in Europe now, so I spent a lot of time with many Native Indian medicine men while I was learning my stuff, and I wished I could go back and ask these guys questions about the history. And I'm wondering, since you're still in Australia, have you had the opportunity to go or know somebody who's connected to some Aboriginal elders and ask them, is there anything in the history?
Hopefully I'll have that opportunity soon. I know someone who's connected, and we've got sort of something going with some land. So yeah, I'm hoping that I'll get that opportunity soon. You know, the ones that I've talked to was either before I was onto this, or they're just, you know, a lot of you know, a lot of them just don't have the knowledge. It's just been lost. They don't know, you know, a lot. Basically, if they've been raised in the cities, you know, they don't know the stories anymore. It's a real shame, and that's obviously part of what they do. You know, they go in and they wipe out the stories. You know, we know what happened in South America and all these places. But this is the thing, because, you know, Australia has these buildings. We have giant-sized buildings. There was world fairs in at least 4 cities.
Right.
I found another one in literally in a town that's in the middle of the desert in WA, just in the middle of nowhere. Like, it's literally like 3 hours drive into the desert. It's just bizarre. So yeah, I mean, the natives must know something about this. You know, so why don't they talk about it? Is it hidden? Do they know that it's sort of taboo, or are we talking again about it was just wiped out during one generation? You know, pretty much, this is a new story. If you talk about the old stuff, we'll kill you. You know, if you tell it to your kids, we'll kill your kids. And that's how you stop it. That's how you stop information in one generation.
Yeah. Right.
You know, and then the next generation, you just say, you know, no, you just grew up in a hut over there and you had a stick, and that's the story. So
yeah, I mean, you know, I know, of course, the how things were done to the natives in North America, and how easy it took once you got them on the reserve. That was it. Their history was already getting to be destroyed. I know, though, that there's the medicine people I knew who were still far more advanced than I was, right? And still had access to a lot of knowledge, but even they claimed, but whatever they knew, the guys in the 1500s, they used to tell me, the medicine men of the 1500s were way far more advanced than they are. But there's still 1 or 2 people of every tribe that even the medicine people are afraid of. That literally, I was told a story by Dennis, a Chippewa medicine man, and he talked about that there were 2 elders that sort of existed for the entire Chippewa nation. So not just for their own little tribe, but they were like 2 or 3 guys for the whole thing. And that almost nobody would ever be allowed to even talk to them, because the level of knowledge, or I guess power, that they had was beyond. But even so, the medicine people I talked to were always testing me as a white person. You know, was I there to steal stuff? Was I there to try to take advantage of it? Or was I really trying to learn something? But I was always under a test. But to even they don't get to talk to these people. So that's the challenge is this, some of this information might still exist in a few people in selected tribes around the world, but they know they have to keep they've had to hide it for the last 100 or 200 years or whatever. And so even if it's there, it's going to be difficult to gain the trust to even know if it exists.
Well, this is the thing. And I mean, I guess they probably don't want, you know, the nefarious people to know this stuff as well, because obviously, you know, great knowledge, you know, can be used against you. It's a bit of a sad situation. And this is the question is, you know, what do they know, and why is it so, you know, why is it such a threat to, you know, why is history such a threat to the establishment? You know, why is it, you know, if you challenge history, you know, you're just a kook, and everything is, like you said, everything's distorted. You know, we were smaller and weaker, and if it's anything apart from the narrative, it's a fairy tale, you know, and it's myths, you know, all these stories. No, they're just legends and myths, like Troy, you know. No, it's just a myth, you know, until they found it.
Yeah.
You know, so what it seems like is that where we are, this Earth was a much different, but much more fantastic, you know, place, as far as energy, as far as, you know, whatever you want to call it, magic, powers. I think there's a big possibility that there was more than one peoples or type of beings down here. you know, because we see that as well. We used to actually have pygmies in Australia up
Right.
into the 50s, but I think they wiped them all out. You know, that so there's small people, there's big people, there's middle people. You know, it's almost like Lord of the Rings a bit, isn't it?
Yeah, it's what when I first started studying my ancient Egyptian stuff 20 years ago, that was the first thing I ran into head on, was that there was a period that what was going on is we had a period of time where human power was at a height. Human ability was at a height. And I saw right away that they're trying, everything is designed to downplay that. Either it's all done by copper tools and slaves pulling stones, or it's then others, well, it's aliens, it's something else. It can't just be human power, human potential, because if that's what gets presented, people today would start saying, well, why aren't we doing that today? Why are we living in this crap? Why are we living in this crap society when we could be building and living in this stuff? And if people knew that, there would be this call to either how do we get the power back or what happened to it? And as long as you make the past look stupid, this idea of evolution, this concept that we have to be the best because that's what the system tells us it is, no one starts asking, well, actually, is that true? Maybe we're at the bottom now, and how do we get out?
It's almost that smugness, isn't it? You know, like if evolution is we started off as amoebas and, you know, went to monkeys and all this kind of stuff, and, you know, now we're the biggest and the strongest and the smartest and we're so technological,
Yeah.
you know, just ignore the war and the poverty and all that kind of stuff.
Just keep talking, Campbell. I'm going to let my cat out. Just keep going. Tell the people.
No worries, yeah. And so all these people, you know, they think that they're the best, and they think that, you know, they've got all these degrees and all this information, and basically, so they walk around with smugness on their face. And when you do that, when you think you know everything, you can't question anything.
No, you can't.
So,
or if you question it, there's something wrong with you.
Yeah, that's what they like to tell you. But, you know, it's like I used to always tell my kids, it's, you know, the people who know everything, they're the most stupid people around. You know, they have to be, right? Because they can't learn anything. Like, you know, they can't ask questions. They can't move, you know, them from their mental perspective. But
No, and I mean, and that blew me away when, like I say, when I was doing my research, and once you would come up with those granite blocks on the Giza Plateau or at Abu Sir or whatever that are so perfectly rounded and smooth and, you know, have the laser cuts in them, and they say, oh yeah, copper tools. But you actually have, there's only like 2 places in the world today with laser diamond technology that can actually create this today. And oh no, copper tools. These are, like you say, the experts. These are the people who are supposed to be telling the world answers, and they can't get past that. They're so indoctrinated into the idea, and so it's interesting to see how that happens, because it's so obvious when you look at it.
It is, and I mean, they've got the letters behind their name, haven't they? So they're, you know, they're important people. You know, apart from the fact that, you know, if they spoke out, they would, you know, lose their jobs and their income and everything. But most of them are just, they get sort of caught up in this, look at me, I'm so important, I've got the truth. And of course, everyone else around who's smug, because this is, you know, education. We're taught to look outside of ourselves for the answers. We, you know, here's your teacher, they'll give you the answers. So when we grow up, we look for the experts. You know, oh, that's the expert, you know, that's, what's his name? Hawass.
Right.
You know, he knows everything. So I'm just going to repeat what he says, and that makes me smart.
So that'll take us back. So let's take us back to the fairs then, talking about as potential indoctrination centers and indoctrination centers of our history. And I'll just give you a couple of the rides that existed at the St. Louis World's Fair in 1904 for the people just who don't know this. There were like 100 of these rides, but I'm just going to give you a couple of them here. One was ancient Rome. Yeah. So they had ancient Rome. They had 400 actors used to give the illusion the time of going back to the gladiators. They had an arena. They had a hippodrome with chariot races, jousting, gladiatorial chases with 200 persons, 20 animals, including tigers, lions, and leopards. The finale was a reproduction of Nero's Rome burning. That's an exhibit at the St. Louis World's Fair. How about Jerusalem, which had 22 streets, 300 buildings, replicated the stable Jesus is said to be born, the Golden Gate, the Mosque of Omar, and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Let's continue. Oh, actually, oh, sorry, 1,000 people traveled from Jerusalem to participate and work at the exhibit. You could walk down the streets of Cairo, where you'd smoke a water pipe, ride a camel, or walk through a replica of Luxor Temple. At the streets of Seville, you would have a replica of the Plaza de Torres in Madrid and the Gypsy Lane of Barcelona. The Great Siberian was a train ride that allowed you to cross the entire Russian railway. So it's like it would take you all day. You would feel like the train was moving, then it would stop, like the scenery would move past you, the doors would open, and you would be at a different town somewhere on the Siberian Railroad. And then while the train was supposedly moving, they would move all the stuff, put together a new town to make you think you would stop somewhere else. You also had Paris, replica of downtown Paris. You had a replica of an Irish village. You had a replica of Constantinople, the Chinese village, the old St. Louis, more and more and more. That's just the St. Louis World's Fair.
That is unbelievable, isn't it? That is seriously like introducing a new history, a new story, his story.
Totally. They figured you need 50, 60,000 actors to portray all the parts. And if you're one of the people, and say, I was saying that, of course, the poor aren't going to, whatever poor people you're classifying, let's say it's not a total re-indoctrination, that there are cities at this point, the poor can't go to these. So it's only people who have a fairly decent income, heightened society, which means all the school teachers will be there, all the university teachers will be there, anybody who's in any kind of position, people who write books, who produce books, the people who have access to presenting the narrative to the next generation will all be going there. So even if they're not themselves trying to do anything, conspiratorial, if they're trusting that the thing they're going to is presenting them the honest history, then of course they're going to want to present when they go back to their school to teach their kids, oh, let me tell you what ancient Rome was really like. I just saw it at the St. Louis World's Fair, and all of a sudden the snowball is going to roll that whatever these fairs were presenting historically is going to get into the minds of the people who are there, who will present it to the next generation. And all of a sudden when the books come, well, that has to be right. But it was, when I dug into that, it was colossal. It had to be massive to put this off.
And all they have to do is, 20, 30 years earlier, just sort of start, putting a few articles or little books out mentioning Rome and Egypt. And they don't have to say much, picture of a pyramid and Egypt written next to it. And people are like, oh, and they want the more information. And like you say, when it's given to you in that sort of surrounding, you're like, oh, that's the truth. It's like like now we have encyclopedias and all this kind of stuff to go to get the answers, don't we? But they're all written by these universities, the one song. It's yeah.
So it makes me wonder, like you say, were these fairs what you might call the indoctrination points of all of our modern thinking? And that literally before the fairs started, what actually did people think or believe about the world? And like you say, then you add the whole society thing that was placed in there of the levels of different races and how they operate and what kind of foods you should be eating and what kind of diets you should have and the baby incubators and the whatever, just these huge societal areas that are, again, teaching a way of thinking. And so, yeah, to me, it had to be like a gigantic either teaching or indoctrination center. And like you say, this is perfect. It's like a traveling, when you don't have television or movies or whatever else to do it, it's like a traveling historical teaching show going around the world presenting a narrative.
It's just unbelievable, isn't it? I mean, if obviously there's been, devastation, we see it everywhere, sort of plasma events or mud floods. So, if the population was devastated and you leave that for a couple of generations, you would literally have people everywhere who really don't know what the hell is going on. They wouldn't even know what the country was called that they're in. They'd just be in survival mode for a few generations. And then it's quite easy to introduce, oh, this is the world before then, this is how it was. And then over the time, you just sort of take out the mud, the cataclysm in the middle.
Right.
And it just turns into this fluid history. But clearly, when you look at it, it doesn't make sense. And this is one thing that Jay Widener was saying, that he said he was watching a video about, is this what's the word, like a projected reality? Is this all
Oh, a simulation thing.
simulation? That's the word. Yeah, is this
Right.
simulation? And these people were saying that the best way to find out would be to look at the past, because if the past doesn't make sense, and if there's cracks in it, that probably means you're in a simulation, because they would have spent a lot more time on getting the present correct, and sort of left, faults in the past. So I mean, that's, I guess, another way to look at it. Is this just a big simulation? And I guess any way you look at it, it is a big simulation, because like we were just saying, if they introduce a narrative and a story and we all believe that, and then we project that out and live into that story, well, that's a simulation, isn't it?
Right.
They've sort of changed our, like you said, our perspective of who we are and our actual power. And it's like, here's your story. Yeah, believe that. You're a worker. This is your job. This is,
Right.
and you mentioned camels. In 1851 in the USA.
Right.
How did they get there? Because I've been thinking
well,
about horses in Australia. They say, oh, no horses. They all came by ship.
Right.
Back in the 1700s, these tiny ships that took between 6 and 9 months to get here. So we're talking horses standing up, not being able to run around for 6 to 9 months. I mean, is that even possible?
Yeah. It's or like at the Chicago World's Fair, for example, as an example, the world sent like tons of materials, like tons. So like the German exhibits, for just example, one country, I can't remember, would have been like 3 or 4 boats worth of stuff, right? When the fair ended, though, all these, and some of this stuff is supposed to be priceless, like, priceless porcelains, priceless artwork, priceless whatever, they all sent to display at the fair. When the fair's over, all these countries pretty much said, yeah, it's too expensive to just keep it. Yeah, we don't want it anymore, just keep it. And that was the story as to why they had to keep the one building. They turned into the Chicago Field Museum, which was to house all of the stuff that they couldn't send back to all the other countries that had been part of the World's Fair. That's the story.
Wow.
And so it's just, and it was the same with the San Francisco World's Fair in 1915. Again, almost every country in the world in the middle of World War I sent stuff to the San Francisco World's Fair, would have all had to come on ships at a time when German U-boats are blowing up ships at random in the ocean. You would think, we're going to pass on sending a lot of priceless stuff to the San Francisco Fair this year. But no, that didn't seem to be a problem. Just get it on the ships and send it over. And nothing apparently got damaged in any way, shape, or form on the transport. So it's all of even things like that. Every time I dig into something about the fairs, it's something that just doesn't make sense.
No, that sounds like there was a full functioning civilization worldwide, and all that stuff was already in the Americas.
It would have to be.
And they've got it, and then they've just decided, this is cool stuff, we'll keep this amount. We'll let the public see this stuff, is probably more to the point.
Right.
We'll take all the good tech away.
Right.
But yeah, like you said, I mean, that's just a crazy story. I mean, that's ridiculous, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
so, yeah, and it's because of course we are in the middle of living history right now. Like, we're talking about history 150 years ago or whatever this time, but we're actually living it right now. Like, this is, and it makes me wonder so much, like 50 years from now, depending on how this goes, how are the history books going to display this particular period of our time, as I try to put my mindset into, well, what were the writers in 1900 writing about history in the First World Fairs and what's going on then? And yeah, and it's kind of like I'm trying to put myself 50 years in the future. What's going to be said about this period?
They will not believe anything that, oh my gosh. But this is, I mean, and I've mentioned this quite a few times in videos, is that, this really is a time that we need to, take control back and use intention and create the world. And and get rid of this story, because that's all that really is happening is at the moment is they're just introducing a new story, a new narrative, and trying to get people to believe it and live into it. And as long as people do that, then that will happen. But if people don't do it, if we all decide to build our own story, our story instead of his story, then we can change it. But this is the thing: what will we be the crazy ones or the ones that actually change? Because as we know, it's always is the crazy ones that change things, isn't it? It's
but that's why people, why am I still talking about the fairs? Why do we still have these conversations? And to me, it's because what you just said is highly likely what these fairs were about. They were about creating the narrative that everyone needed to believe. And if everyone believed the narrative, that would be what would come in place. And if you didn't believe it, well, we have all these giant insane asylums that we just send you to, and you just stay in there till you either believe the story or die. And that doesn't surprise me if we're seeing a repeat just in a little higher technological version right now.
Yeah, well, exactly. Look around what's going on. It's been said, it's been said on TV that, they want certain people to be silenced and hunted down and re-educated.
Yeah, re-educated.
Re-educated, which is exactly what we've been talking about, given a new story and you believe this or you get locked up.
Yeah.
You're a crazy one. So it seems like the song remains the same, doesn't it? Like that, it really seems like they've only got one narrative, one way to get us, one way of controlling us, and that's just by getting us to believe their story and to go along with it. And as soon as we stop doing that, and this is why they're hiding the past, isn't it? Because if we all knew that we could build these great societies working together, maybe we'd all look at each other as as something good and something with potential to go further. But instead they've got us looking at each other as the enemy. Right. And somehow half the people are looking at them, the government and other organizations, as the people that are going to save them. So they've really sort of split it down the middle, haven't they? And
anyone who knows who's involved in any kind of team sport, one of the first jobs you have as a coach is to get all of your players to believe in whatever system you want to use. Because if half the team wants one system and half the team wants the other system, then it doesn't matter what kind of talent you're carrying. You're going to have chaos. You're going to have problems. You're going to have serious difficulties. But you can take a lesser talented group of people who all say, okay, we're going to follow. This is what we're going to do. We believe in this, and we're going forward. They can create great things in the course of a season because they're all on the same page. And it's this dual thing, like you're saying. If the group that's trying to run the show gets everyone to believe one narrative, then that narrative is going to gain tremendous power because of the mental energy, the mental projection. Because I get the sense a lot of this reality is just a projection. Whatever's in human minds, just whatever we project out, that's reality. And so if you can get enough people believing a certain reality, that's what you're going to get. And like you say, the opposite. If enough people decide to produce a different mental state, they'll produce a different reality, a different narrative. And it's all about really the whole thing that's going on, and maybe has always gone on here for a long time, is just control of perception. Control of human, if you control human perception, that's how you control or shape the reality. And that's what all this is about.
I agree, totally. Awesome. And just as a last note as well, isn't it interesting that all this information's come out at this point? I mean, seriously, this is all 5 years old, maybe at the most, as far as all this kind of new information. Right. If you mentioned World Fairs 10 years ago, no one would know what you were talking about. And where are all these pictures and photos? They've sort of appeared. Were they always there? Or, I've sort of wondered about that as well. Why did no one come across them before? You have all these historians. So I find it very interesting that it suddenly popped out at this time in history, at this time, that we're changing ages. Is this kind of like a tap on the shoulder, like hang on, guys, this has happened to you before, and look where you've got. It might be time to, make a different decision because these people are trying to control you. Here's the proof. Look what happened,
Yeah, very interesting to just try to think about how all this stuff relates to where we are right now, because I feel that's that's the focal point, and that's the direction that all of us as researchers, I kind of feel that, you know, like yourself and Michelle and John and everyone's doing really good research in various fields, but we're all finding different pieces of the jigsaw puzzle. And the most important part is how can we fit those pieces together to start showing a much larger picture. And so that's something I'm really hoping that, like, as I see more and more of these kind of collaborative interviews happening, that that's what's going on. That now, well, at the beginning we were maybe kind of on our own doing our own thing, that we kind of are seeing we have to do this as a much bigger group, because that's the only way we'll get a fuller scope of what's going on and what has gone on.
Definitely. I agree with that totally. You know, I've said it before, you know, we're all part of the puzzle, all got to put our own piece in, and that way we'll get to see, you know, the picture together. It's definitely it's not a sort of popularity contest, that's for sure.
Yeah. So.
All right. Well, awesome. Thank you for spending some time with us, Howie. That was really good. Yeah. And I would like to get you back. You know, it might be good to organise, you know, a roundtable of some kind and get a few of us on it. And because, like you've mentioned, it really is time. We've got all this information, all these facts, all this evidence. So now let's start piecing together a story, an outcome, and a path forward.
Sounds good.
Awesome. All right. Well, you have an awesome day.
Thanks, again. You too. And we will stay in touch and
definitely will.
Take it easy.
Thanks, mate. Talk soon.
Cheers.
See you, mate. Where's record?